So we've just analyzed what's going to be the short-run decision of a firm facing a certain price and determining what output level to produce if it chooses to produce, whether it's making money, whether it's losing money and wants to shut down immediately, or it's losing money and wants to shut down before renegotiating its lease agreements and other things like that. So now we're going to look at the long-run equilibrium. Here, the one thing you should keep in mind is we're looking here at the long-run evolution. Okay, our goal here is defining what is the long-run evolution. How will things evolve over time? When I mean by long-run equilibrium, long-run evolution, I'm not necessarily curious at looking at the long-run cost curves. I'm just curious of seeing how will firms enter and exit under a perfectly competitive market. The thing that we'll notice is that some existing firms will exit the market if they're losing money, naturally, as we mentioned before, but also if there's a lot of profit to be made, some new firms will be attracted to enter the market if there's positive profit. So in the long run, we're going to end up in this situation that firms enter or exit until every firm has zero profit. And here the thing to make sure is that this zero profit that we're talking about is zero economic profit, which is not a bad thing. Okay, so I'll highlight this again. Not a bad thing. Why is it not a bad thing? Well, it's because when we have zero economic profit, it's a situation where the business owner is not making an excess amount of profit versus what other options he may have when we include opportunity costs, because zero economic profit includes opportunity costs. So in a certain way, let's say to keep it easy, let's say someone is making $100,000 a year and he decides to quit his job to open up a lemonade stand. And in that, when he runs that lemonade stand, he works the same amount of hours per year and puts the same amount of effort, the same stress level. And if he still earns $100,000, well, then that would be a situation that he's making zero economic profit. However, if he were to make $500,000 a year selling lemonade and not taking on extra risk or extra working hours, well, then he would be in a situation of economic profit where other people with the same kind of education level and everything else, same level of entrepreneurship, may want to enter and also gain some of that extra money. So essentially, when you think I could run a business, make exactly the same amount of money that I earn working for someone else for the same hours worked, that would be zero economic profit. If I make more, then I'm making a positive economic profit. And if I make less, I'm making an economic loss. So if you're quitting your job $100,000 a year to start your own business and you only make $50,000 of profit in that business, well, $50,000 of profit in the accounting sense would mean that you'd be making an economic loss of about $50,000, because if you include your opportunity cost of $100,000, you've actually lost money there. So zero economic profit is not a bad thing, because if you decide to give up your business and go work for someone else, well, you'll essentially just make the same amount of money. Okay? So let's see how this works out on a graph. So far we've only used one graph. Well, we kind of have to understand where it comes from, where this information comes from. So we're going to use two graphs this time. Okay. Whether one's left and the other one's right doesn't really matter. I sometimes flip these around. So I'm going to put on the left, I'm going to put the whole market. And on the right here, I'm going to put a typical firm. And here it's price, but we often refer to it as dollars when we have the cost curves. It's the same thing, it's a dollar amount. And over here, I'm going to have the total quantity of the market. Just to make a distinction, I'm going to use a small q. It's not a big deal if you don't use it, but this is to represent the quantity of one firm. Okay? So this is what we have. So if we think about this, we'll have our typical cost curves, our marginal costs, our average variable costs, and our average total costs. As I mentioned, I could add the average fixed cost, which follows this downward pattern, but we will see that it's not useful in this context here. So when I think about this, all of these three cost curves have their own purpose, which I'll discuss in a second. But when we had this graph here, as we had in the last slideshow with these graphs here, we could see that we're either making economic profit, losing money and want to shut down, or losing money and want to shut down eventually. Well, in this context here, we have to kind of understand what's going to happen here. And why do we have a price that's either down here, here, or here? It depends on the market. Okay. So if I have a situation where, I'll start with economic profit, let's say. The other way around works as well. So let's say I have this situation here that initially, like S1 and D1, this is my initial situation. And this is the whole market. It's all the buyers and sellers aggregated. So what this determines here, I could say, is kind of like the world price. Like we see the world price of crude oil fluctuating a lot these days. There's been an increase in supply that's excess of the demand, putting downward pressures on the price. This might be different in the time frame that you're going to watch this video. But essentially, we could see that the world price changes, but this world price is determined by world demand and world supply. And then a typical firm who produces oil observes this price and then makes his own decision. So this would be the price obtained. And we know that for a typical firm under perfect competition, price is equal to marginal revenue, or it's equal to my demand curve for the firm. So I set marginal revenue is equal to marginal costs. I'll see that initially my typical firm will want to produce this quantity here. And this distance between the two, just gonna change colors here. This distance between the two here, it's gonna be my per unit cost. I need to multiply by the quantity there. And all of this would be my profit for the firm initially. Well, what would happen here over time? What would happen over time if we have profit, so excess profits being made? So we have this situation that these firms are run by individuals. So I'm running a lemonade stand and I'm making $200,000 a year running a lemonade stand. Well, other people will want to do the same thing. As other people want to do the same thing, will this shift demand or supply in the market? Well, more suppliers will be coming in. As more suppliers come in, I'll have this situation where the supply curve will shift right. Okay. You could have it shift just a little bit. I could do it in multiple steps. Where I've done it now might be just one shift, or I might have done it a little bit too much. But here, because of positive profit, we have new entrants. And this will make the supply curve shift right. Okay. What's this gonna do? Well, it's gonna drop down the world price. So let's say this is a world price prime, this new world price. And at this new world price, actually, I'm in this situation here that if I set this marginal revenue, this price curve is equal to marginal cost, I could see that the typical firm will produce less. Does this mean that there's less production in total? No, we have more suppliers. This is just one firm. So if we had 1,000 firms producing this amount, and now we have 1,500 producing a smaller amount, in total, the big quantity here, as we can notice from this graph here, the total quantity being produced has gone from Q1 to Q2. So there has been an increase in exchange of goods in the total market, but a typical firm may have seen a drop because it's facing a lower price. And at this lower price, while I'm actually here, the price, my revenue per unit and my cost per unit are the same, so I'm not making any profit. this would be going to a situation of zero economic profit. Okay. And this, I say, is a long-run evolution. It doesn't happen instantly. A firm making profits or losses is something you observe right away. But once you observe profits or losses for a firm in a specific industry, it's going to create an incentive in this market structure where there's free entry and exit. It's not always true that there's free entry and exit. It's going to create an incentive for competitors to come in when there's profits and for people within the industry to leave when there's losses. So over time, this will evolve to a situation where we have zero economic profit in the long run. And again, this is very specific to the situation of perfect competition, where you can't differentiate yourself between with competitors based on the quality of your product, your attributes through marketing. There's no marketing based on Saudi Arabia oil or Iran oil or other countries. It's all if they have the same level of standard, like whether it's depending on how it's rated, that's all it's going to be. But afterwards, there's no marketing itself that could happen. So we'll have a situation of zero economic profit over time. Okay? So this is what we observe. If it were the other way around, that we started with a lower price, whether it's in the shutdown immediately or shut down eventually situations, what we would see is over time, supply would go down, and as supply would go down, less firms are willing to sell. It's going to start bringing up the price, and the price will go up and up and up to the point where it reaches zero economic profit. So from one way or the other, it converges to that point. And once again, when I'm asking about long-run equilibrium here, I'm not looking at the long-run cost curves we had in Chapter 8. Essentially, I'm just looking at this idea of how will the industry evolve so that you guys could start understanding what's the eventual evolution that we should expect. Even though this deals with perfect competition, if you have a great idea for a business in Sherbrooke or some other area, even though we're not in perfectly competitive market structures, you have to keep in mind what's the evolution going to be. So many years ago, I thought that a hot yoga studio would be a great idea in Sherbrooke, because in Montreal, it was very popular when I was living in Montreal, and I thought it'd be a great idea in Sherbrooke. And one opened up. A good friend of mine opened up a yoga studio in Sherbrooke, and it did pretty well, and it's still doing very well. But all of a sudden, you could notice that there's not only one left, one around. There's multiple. They're growing. A lot of them are growing around. So as there's profit, as there's a clear demand for a product, more people will start coming in and trying to offer their own services. So this is something you have to keep in mind. You can't expect to come in with a great idea and that no one will try to replicate it over time. You always have to think about what's going to be the long-run evolution. Okay? So last thing I want to cover here is, I kind of mentioned it here, but I'll mention it on another slide. What are the purposes of each of these cost curves? So how should you go about analyzing this, whether you're in a situation, so you might start in a situation where you have zero economic profit, and then there's going to be a demand shock or a supply shock, making the price go up or down, making it a situation of economic loss or profit. But you have to understand why these three cost curves are useful and what's the purpose. Okay. So taking a look at this, why do we use all three cost curves? In which order are they useful? Well, when I analyze this, I normally see where, first off, I look at where MR is equal to MC. And the MC, the purpose it serves is to tell me what quantity is profit maximizing, or we could say optimal, to produce if I choose to produce. Okay. So first off, when you do these graphs, the first one you're interested in is looking at the marginal cost curve and the marginal revenue curve. Well, looking at that cost curve, the marginal cost curve, it tells you the optimal quantity. What quantity is profit maximizing, optimal to produce if I choose to produce. So what's my optimal quantity? So on this graph here, we find that, okay, this for this price here, this was my quantity. For this price here, this is my quantity if I choose to produce. I'm not sure if I'm going to want to produce or not yet. So afterwards, I look at my ATC and I determine, am I making profit, positive profit, or losses? Profit is when price is greater than my average total cost at that quantity, at Q star. Okay, so at that quantity I choose to produce is price greater than average total cost. Or if my price that I receive per unit is smaller than my average total cost, then I'd be making losses. So my ATC helps me determine whether I'm making profits or losses. If I'm making profits, I only need these two cost curves. However, if profits are negative, if I'm making losses, then the AVC will tell me, should I shut down now? And shut down now would be a situation where I say, I produce 0, and I produce 0 if price does not cover my average variable costs. Or stay in operation a little longer. In operation. And this would be the case where you're not losing money by staying open extra days. The days you decide to open, you're actually making money on those days, but the money you make on those days are not enough to cover your fixed costs, your rent, and everything else. But because your rent's already been paid, your insurance, your different permits, let's say, to sell alcohol, all of that has already been paid off. You might as well try to enjoy it, to make some money off of it and not lose as much. Okay, so marginal is equal to MC tells me the quantity. After I have known the quantity, I could determine whether I'm making profits or losses based on this relationship. If I'm making losses, it tells me whether I should shut down or stay in operation a little longer. Okay? So these are the cost curves you will be using.